Welcome to the I Made a podcast, where we hear from podcasters about what they've learned since starting their own show, so you can do the same. And now, here's your host, Chris Creary.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of I Made a Podcast. I'm so grateful that you took time out of your day to listen. This is going to be a great episode. Trust me on that. Today, I spoke with Dani Marie. Now, she is a podcast planning strategist. Wouldn't you want to know what she actually does in that role? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, on top of that, she also has 5 podcasts herself, 5 of them. Wow. So we talked about all the things that make her podcast pop and talk about what she does as a podcast planning strategist. So we're going to get into this episode. But before we do, I want to remind you of my podcasting cheat sheet. So there's a link in the description. I've created this cheat sheet for you if you are just starting your podcast and you want to get a list of the resources, both software and hardware, things that you need to get to start a podcast. Now, the good thing about this cheat sheet and these resources that I mentioned, a lot of the software that I put on this resource list is free. So that's why I call it a cheat sheet, because you can get good sounding audio for free with a lot of these resources that I mentioned on this cheat sheet. So if you want to get that cheat sheet, just go into the link in the description and you can download a copy for yourself. I'm all about helping podcasters get better. So this is a way that I am doing it to help you. So now we're going to get into this interview with Dani Marie. Get your pen and your notepad right there beside you so you can take some note, because we went over a lot of great things in this episode that can help you as a podcaster. So let me go and get Dani Marie now, and I'll be back at the end of this episode to close things off. All right, everybody, welcome to I Made a Podcast. Today, I am speaking to Dani Marie. How are you today?
I am so well. Thank you so much for having me. I just finished a workout about 30 minutes ago. I'm on my kind of 31-day health journey.
Wonderful.
And so things are moving along. Where we are right now in present time, we are 11 days into the month, and I've just been on a roll. So I'm really excited about the journey that I'm on. I've taken a beat away from actively podcasting, actively on social media, and just been focused on my health and wellness. And I'm excited to be on this interview and platform with you. Thank you for having me again. There's a little bit of similarities to some of the things that we do. So this is cool to hear from you and vice versa. So thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah. So you are a podcaster, but you are also a podcast planning strategist, right?
That's correct.
This is gonna be a great interview. It's gonna be a little different from what I usually do. So first of all, I'm gonna ask if you can just let us know about your podcast that you have, because I know you have a few. So you can let us know the name of your podcast and how people can find it if they want to listen to your podcast. And then you can get into a little bit more about what you do as a podcast planning strategist.
Yes. Just very quickly to give more context, I am a single millennial mom based in Washington, raised in a single parent household to a military mom. She served in the Army for several years, and she decided to, after being stationed here in Washington, remain here in Washington by way of Illinois and raise my brother and I as a single mom. So forever and a day, I've been raised under a single parent household with my mother. And I think that's important to preface, just because here I am, full circle, a single mom. During COVID, I became a mom for the first time. And at that time, I was at the cusp of 2 layoffs from 2 full-time jobs. My father passed away the day after my son's first birthday. Then having become a mom for the first time after several losses, and all of those things. And then again, as single mom, all of those variables are the reasons in how I got pushed into podcasting. So I started a podcast with my mom called the Mother and Daughter Duo Podcast, or MAD for short. It was extremely important that we had that podcast together so that we can talk about my life as a single mom, bringing new life into this world at the height of the pandemic, at the cusp of loss of 2 jobs and my dad. So having all of this newness is what inspired me to have a podcast. I needed a medium and a platform for me to discuss all of these changes that I was going to undergo. My mother and I had conversations on our podcast like, how do we become parents? How do we become single parents? Abandonment issues, parenting styles. We talked about a lot of tough conversations especially if you know, as a person of color, what happens in my house stays in my house. We don't generally get to have these conversations with our parents. And so that's how Mad Podcast came about. During that time, I was at a studio and I was with a producer. And then again, also at the tail end of me on my third trimester, we recorded those 20 episodes on the Mad Podcast. And so at that time, we kind of severed ties, or not severed ties in such a bad way, but he went in a different direction. I went in a different direction. I became a mom of two. So life was lifing. And that kind of set me back just a little bit. I had to pivot. We talked about that offline, and had to re-strategize. So basically, I went from a high-level production studio to having to record at home with two children. I've learned how to build an ecosystem from inside of my home, building again from the ground up because I never had the equipment. I was used to being in the studio. And so all of those things, I got to learn my way around podcasting, building from the ground up. And once I got back into podcasting after the Mother and Daughter Duo podcast, I said, well, how can I continue to exercise these muscles, still, connect with people, still network at a high level, and bring more people into the fold? I know that I want to go back to doing the Mother and Daughter Duo podcast. And now thinking back, that will probably be something like a network that I do. But at that time, when I thought about what can I do now, before going back to the Mother and Daughter Duo podcast, it was Follow Me Friday. Follow Me Friday was a call of action for people to join me on a live stream where we can have these candid conversations, but also where you get a chance to have your 15 minutes of fame. You can talk about who you are, what you do, where you're from, and essentially why people should follow and support your movement. And so we brought people into the fold, such as coaches, business owners, consultants, and authors. And those are pretty much the people that we connect with on Follow Me Friday. And that just became like an addiction for me. I just got really excited about the reach, the growth, networking, the stories I was hearing. And so that just kind of led me on this trajectory of having multiple podcasts. So it went from Follow Me Friday to Motivation Monday Mommy Meetup, which is also group attendance, upwards of 5 women who are all bosses in their own right, who talk about who they are, what they do, and how to balance life as a mom and business owner. Then we have Life Unscripted with Dani Marie. That's one-on-one interview format. And through that, we do conversations again with some of the same type of people, business owners, authors, and coaches, but they get to come and talk about the arc of their story. It's very intimate, the pivots, the transformations. And then I said, you know what? All of this is very serious. I want to do something a little more lighthearted. So then Throw It Back Thursday came into the fold. Throw It Back Thursday is where you can shoot the breeze and talk about everything that happened in social media and mainstream news that you felt resonated with you, or things that you want to throw away and toss out because it's a bad trend and you don't want to ever see it again. And it's a way for people to see the personal side, the personal branding, because often we have to wear our professional hats. Mm-hmm. And then Plan to Podcast. It stemmed from Plan to Podcast, the business. As the business, my role is a podcast planning strategist to help industry experts launch, grow, and monetize their podcast. And so what a cool way to also create a podcast around that, where we have conversations with podcasters about their podcast, about why you should start a podcast. And so that's how I grew to have 5 podcasts. I will say it does require, consistency, a workflow, sometimes a team, but you do need to have a system. So I've created SOPs around what I do and workflows around what I do. And I've brought in team members to help me. And that is how we arrived to where I am at today. Like, I do all of the full-time podcasting. Like I said, I've took a month off because, like you, just recording kind of in advance. and allowing myself to work in a season kind of situation where some people like to go continuously. I like to break it up. Some people don't necessarily know that I broke it up because I have content that will sustain me. But always, every time I take a break, always looking to evolve everything that I do. And with that, we're going to be moving into membership communities. And someone just gave me their podcasting Facebook group and they moved in a different direction. So that's been a complete blessing. So all of these things are now working in my favor and we're looking to elevate the brand.
Wow, that is a lot. It's funny when I talk to other podcasters and I tell them, yeah, I have 2 podcasts and I, do podcast promotion. They're like, Chris, how do you manage to do 2 podcasts? And I'm just like, well, I plan for it, have a good strategy with what I do. And then I meet you. So this is 5 podcasts that you have. And then you work with other podcasters as well to help them, as you mentioned, your business part of it, which is Plan to Podcast, which is also the name of your podcast. So can you talk a little bit about some of the things you mentioned, the consistency and the workflow that needs to be there for podcasters if they are going to be successful? So you have 5 podcasts. I have 2 of my own and I manage others. And so I understand this, but for the people out there who have one and can't manage the one podcast because they have so much, they feel like it's a lot of things to do. They probably want me to ask you, when it comes to consistency and workflow, what insights can you give to them that can help them with regards to their one podcast that they may be struggling to do every single week?
Sure. So, first of all, I don't see this being feasible if you also have a full-time job. I think you should probably stick to the 1 or the 2, right? So I don't work aside from this. This is work for me. This is a full-time gig for me. That's important to preface. And then for me, being on the West Coast, it's also very challenging. So I explained that I start my first show at 5:30 a.m. And so that has to be both because I'm a mom of 2 little boys and I have to try to get up and beat the clock before they have a chance to get up, number 1. And 2, because I want to accommodate people who also do have a full-time job, but are also on the East Coast. So thinking about time management, that's extremely important. And working around other people's schedules. Sometimes it's not going to be necessarily for you in things that are more accommodating to you. Sometimes you have to consider who you serve. And in my case, people on the East Coast are some of the people that I serve. And so I have to think about, okay, gosh, this is going to be difficult, but I have to push myself to get up a little earlier. And so I did that. And I think working around my kids' schedule has also helped. So I work around their nap times. I work around my kids' school time. So when he was in school, I recently pulled him out. He was only in early learning. So it's not like I pulled him out of, kindergarten, first grade. He's only 3. Mm-hmm. He was early learning, so 11 to 3. And I basically would work earliest in the morning. That made it possible for me to have a podcast. And then when he was at school and my youngest was having a nap time. So just kind of like being very strategic and working around your kids' schedule if you can, work around your work schedule if you can, but also people who you're trying to accommodate. So 5:30 a.m. is the first interview, only 1 hour. And then 1:30 p.m. is the second interview, only 1 hour. And then because my son is coming home from a full day from 11 to 3, he started to have a late nap time. So from 3 to 5, I do my third show sometimes, or I consult people during that time. But I let people know, sometimes that third show, you might hear my kids, but that's why I wouldn't do like an interview where we're face to face. I would do like meet off screen, right, and use tools like AI so that if my kid is screaming in the background, which does sometimes happen, then I will not be the person speaking. I'll just use AI to kind of cover up. So I try to use tools and techniques like that, but that is my workflow. And then also on Zoom, I love Zoom. We probably will get into tools a little later on the latter part of this, but the reason why I love Zoom is because a lot of the workflow is created for me. So Zoom has the capacity to, you can do a scheduling link and send people your scheduling link through Zoom. You can use tools like the forms that Zoom allows you to use through Zoom, meaning that someone can use my link, schedule with me, and I don't have to think twice or bat an eye. It will already be done. So when I said I hired people, I hired a talent booker. He would scout the talent, give them my link, send them my link. They would book on me. And I just 24 hours in advance, look at my calendar and know who I'll be working with the next day. And that's pretty much how it worked out. If you have more specific questions about workflow, I can answer, but that's my workflow.
No, that was good because I got a lot of good takeaways from what you said, right? Because you just went over your workflow for your 5 podcasts. But what I heard was you get up early, right? So you not to make it sound mean or anything, but you beat your kids awake to wake up in the morning. Because I do the same thing. I like to beat my family when I wake up in the morning so that I can get a lot of quality work done before they wake up and I have to, spend time. Not that I don't like it, but I enjoy spending time with my family. But I like to do what I need to do first so that I can spend that quality time with them. So if you are challenged with your podcast and finding the time to do things, number one thing that you said was to wake up early and try to use that time. And actually, I heard recently, I was reading a book and they said that the most creative time for people is early in the morning. Actually, that's when your brain is the most alert, most stimulated. That's when you would get the better ideas to do certain things. And as we were in content creation, that's when in the morning time when you will probably get the best ideas. So it will benefit you a lot to wake up early in the morning.
That's when the world is quiet. It's just peaceful. Yeah.
It's so peaceful. I love it when I wake up early in the morning and I can just focus and get some good quality work done. Now, you also talked about working around your kids' schedule, which again, that's something that, not a lot of people have that luxury to work around the schedule of other people. Now, you talked about your kids, but other people may still have their full-time job that they got to work around. Like myself, I still have my full-time job, but I work around my full-time job. So I would either book time off my full-time job, which is like what I did today, so that I can meet with you, or I will schedule things during like my lunch break or before or after when I'm working, right? So I can still work my full-time job and give my best to my employer. And during my lunch breaks or anything like that, I can, do podcasts and stuff. And you also mentioned something that I think is really important. You mentioned AI and software that integrate into other software to make it the flow automated, right? So I'm in technology. I work in technology. So I know about how integrations and automations can make your life so much easier. So if you are struggling with getting your podcast out, try to see if the software that you are using can offer some sort of automation where you don't have to think about sending the Zoom link to your people who you are interviewing, because once they book a time, the email will be automatically sent to them, right? In some of these softwares where it's automated, you don't got to think about it. You just set your schedule, send them the link, and then the rest is automated. You just show up on the time that they book, and then there you go, you're done. And then you
set it and forget it.
Set it and forget it. Exactly, right? You set it up and then you just let it go, and it just works on autopilot as people go through your process to book an appointment with you. But you also mentioned something else. You mentioned a talent broker, I think you said, or someone that can go out and find people for your podcast. Can you dive into that just a little bit more? I've never heard of this person before, like this job occupation before.
The new age, right?
Yeah, I know.
So actually,
it's a talent broker, right? Is that the name that you mentioned?
I think you can use talent broker or talent booker, interchangeably. But yes, he is a talent booker, and I have not yet heard of another term, but that is what he coined himself. And actually, I found him as a guest on Follow Me Friday. He came in as a guest to promote himself and his services. And at that point, I said, you know what? I could use you. And so I did. But I found him by way of a Facebook group. So plug the Facebook group, not my own, but it is called Need a Guest, because essentially you need a guest for your platform. And in there, you can promote for having someone on your platform or promote yourself to be on someone else's platform. And yeah, we brokered that relationship, back to using that word interchangeably. We brokered a relationship He told me about his services through Follow Me Friday. I reached out to him, and that was the premise of Follow Me Friday. Our tagline is your weekly dose of inspiration and connection.
Wonderful.
And from that, we were able to, build a relationship, and he became someone that I used to find talent. So he went through several different mediums to find people, through Facebook groups, through casting calls. So sometimes I had a lot of actors. It was heavy actors and people who were in the industry. But yeah,
Wow.
he's
Awesome.
no longer with the team because he needed to go into something more full time. But I do think that his work that he was able to provide for when he did was very helpful.
Yeah, wonderful. Again, what I can take away from that is sometimes to make the process a little bit easier for yourself, you might need to invest some funds in order to get someone to help you make that process a little bit easier. Because I'm part of that group that need a guest. I think that's where I met you from. The need a guest group on Facebook. So Facebook's a good place to connect with people. If you're a podcaster, if you need to try to find help, if you need to, this is a talent booker that you can connect with, and you can have them look for the people that you need to interview on your podcast. All right. So Dani Marie, can you tell me a little bit about what you do as a podcast planning strategist? Because there might be people listening right now that would be like, oh, I need to connect with her. She can help me with my podcast. So can you just give us a breakdown, maybe your job description as a podcast planning strategy, or just share it with us what you do in that role?
Yes. So as you can imagine, having 5 shows, people naturally have the question, like, how do you do it? And so naturally, I'm always a person that's, sending information to people, sharing everything that I know, providing insights when I can. But I decided to package that up into Plan to Podcast. So I am helping people, especially industry experts, people who are already experts in their respective fields, kind of transition into podcasting. So I help people launch, grow, and monetize. And I'm kind of at a point or a crossroads where I'm just thinking about, is this a service or is this a product? Because I think that a podcast plan is essentially the number one product that every podcaster should have. And it's basically just like every business has a business plan. I think every podcast, if you want to go full time, should have a podcast plan. Basically, once you get started, how to start, what equipment you should use, how you can grow, what platforms you should grow on, what strategies you should implement, and then how to monetize. There's people that believe that they're going to get all of these big brand deals right away, and that's not the case. But there are other alternatives, ambassadors, affiliate links, merch. And so through podcast plans, we're able to discover that and make the plan customizable to you. Another thing that happens when people get started with podcasting is they get into the industry and they're kind of taken in all of these different directions, and it can be overwhelming because there is so much out there about podcasting. The platforms that you can disseminate your podcast to, the platforms that you can record on, like we talked about Zoom, but there's StreamYard and Riverside. And so to not kind of get confused and figure like this is just way too much and I'm overwhelmed, we want to help you gauge that and build a customizable plan for you, your budget, your ideas, your vision, your goals. And so my most current client is in the sports space. And so we think about and look into all of the popular sports podcasts. And what I discovered, just kind of like giving some more insight, is there's a lot of opportunity for growth for him. Mm-hmm. What I learned is that as a sports podcaster, he is a person of color. We are not really dominating in the sports podcast realm. Now, there's sports podcasts like I Am Athlete and The Pivot, but even those podcasts, when I go to their reviews, they only have like 2,000 reviews. He can create his niche around, we are the highest ranked and reviewed podcast. And, that could be a thing for him. So that's an opportunity for growth, and that's an opportunity to set himself apart. So those are the things that we kind of look at. We start with looking at your social media audit. What's your personal branding? What's your presence like? because I think a part of that a lot of people also forget is your podcast is an extension of who you are, and people will gravitate to your podcast because they see and gravitate to you. So those are the things that we kind of include. When it's a paper document, it's about 41 pages, but we have that also digitized and it's around the same amount. But that's just to give some context, like that's how robust these plans are and beneficial. So sometimes people are like, wow, that's a lot.
Mhm.
But of course, you're not going to implement everything on the same day. This is a tool that you can use to continually, move in the right direction.
Right. And I think one of the important things that you mentioned also, now we all know that if someone is going to start a business without a business plan, what is it? What do they say? If you fail to
That's my
plan, you plan
tagline
to
too.
fail, right?
That's right.
So no
Mhm.
one will start a business without creating a business plan first. But oftentimes people create podcasts without a plan. How are you going to cover if there are costs? How are you going to cover those costs? How are you
Right.
what ways are you going to generate revenue with your podcast if that's your plan? Like you said, we can't all get sponsorships or from these big companies, right? They might look at you and be like, "Who are you?" Right?
Right.
What's your plan to generate revenue? Because there's a lot of actual easy ways that you can generate revenue. Like you talked about affiliate links. And one thing that I do is, as I was telling you before we started recording, is I am a podcast producer and I love editing audio. And you made the comment that I'm in high demand because like I'm the
Right.
only person in the world probably ever, would ever say that publicly that they like editing
Right.
audio, right? So if anyone listening there right now, if you need your podcast, if you're looking for a podcast producer, reach out to me. But
Right.
if you are a podcaster and if you need a podcast plan or a strategy, I would encourage you to contact Dani Marie. So
Yes,
this is a
please.
41-page document that you guys create and you go over everything. That's really, it sounds really extensive and it sounds very like solid and bulletproof the way that you are explaining it. I just wanted to dive into something just a little bit more. You talked about social media and which platforms to grow on or promote on. Is there something that we should look at as podcasters that should lead us to one platform over another, or one method, or one place that we should publish our podcast or share our podcast versus another? Or is it just open, we should share it everywhere?
That's a good question. So I believe that the way that you can make it work for you would be through, no. Look, let me not lie to you. Across all platforms. And you can use tools like Hootsuite or Hootsuite, however you choose to pronounce it, to help you schedule out to those different platforms. But I think that at least for LinkedIn, especially LinkedIn, and I'm not even on LinkedIn. I have a profile on LinkedIn, but I'm not using it to my advantage. But LinkedIn, Threads, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and I feel like I'm missing one.
TikTok, maybe?
TikTok, precisely.
Yeah.
And so at least those. And so it's very difficult to feel like you have to show up in all of those arenas. But yes, those definitely need to be a part of your ecosystem, a part of your platforms that you're posting to on a regular basis. Now, there are others, but I feel like at least those. And I'm just not a fan of X, but I guess you can consider X too. But I think Threads is more wholesome for podcasters. And every time I get on there, all I see is information about podcasting. And
Really?
so the algorithms have worked in my favor because that's all I talk about. So now that's all I see on Threads. I can't say that I'm going to get the same thing on Twitter. But if you have a podcast, meaning that you are trying to keep up with everything because maybe your podcast is in the entertainment space, then yeah, for sure, go to Twitter. But I think also that's a good point. Whatever you do, if there's several different categories like true crime, there's education, self-development, religion, maybe you want to see which platforms are kind of speaking to you based on your category. And maybe that's where you show up in high demand. But I think that those definitely are, those 6, I believe, are the platforms you should at least be hyper-focused on too. Because like, I'm not going to get a Facebook group on IG or the community like that I get on Facebook.
Right.
And on Instagram, all of the reels and the things that you kind of cut up are effective on Instagram.
Right.
Threads, you get to kind of hear what people are thinking, in terms of podcasting, where you can gauge just the podcast industry. So there's a little bit of something on every platform. And TikTok, if you want to get reach widespread in a rapid kind of fast pace, then obviously TikTok is your better move too. So everything offers something a little different. And so that's why I feel you should show up. And then LinkedIn, if you want guests for your podcast, that's like the perfect place to find a quality guest, because everyone is there showing up as their executive self, their best self, their professional self. Yes.
Yeah. Wow. See, so that is great insight that you're sharing right now. So this is what I'm going to do. I've put all the links for people to contact you in the description of this episode. So if anyone listening out there, if you need any type of strategy for your podcast, I would encourage you to contact Dani Marie so that you can get this type of insight from her and help your podcast move from one level to the next.
That's
now,
right.
you talked about X being, that you're not a fan of it. I don't know if you've heard of Blue Sky before.
No, I have not.
Okay, so I just heard about it.
See,
also
you're the tech guy too.
So, well, I learned it through interviewing someone on this podcast. I've learned so much from other podcasters in the last, since I started this podcast. It's blown my mind. So yeah. Blue Sky is when that guy came and he bought Twitter a couple, I think it was
Are we not saying his name?
What's his name? Musk?
Okay.
What? Musk, yeah. I don't know. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of him, but whatever his name is.
Sure, we can go with that.
Yeah. So when he came and he bought Twitter, some of the people who ran Twitter or who were high impactful people in Twitter, they actually left and they started this app called Blue Sky. So and I joined it when I talked to this podcaster a couple weeks ago, and it's like Twitter, but it's not Twitter.
Okay.
Right. So I'm just going to plug that out there. If anyone wants to try Blue Sky, it's a new app. It's a new social media app. And I actually just shared for the first time, last night, one of my podcast episodes. And I got some traction on the post. I have no followers. I don't know anybody on there, but I just kind of used a couple hashtags and I got a couple of responses, some engagement on the post. So I'm monitoring that one to see how well it actually uses or how well I can use it to promote my podcast. But if you haven't heard of Blue Sky before, you might want to, try that one.
Noted.
Suggest it to other people if you're talking to them. But yeah.
People think that hashtags are like a dying breed. And so that's cool to note that they're still effective. So Blue Sky.
Blue Sky, yeah. I'll send you a link afterwards and I'll put a link in the description of this episode so that people can get to it and try it out. Because it might become like an untapped resource of engagement for your podcast that you can use, right? So if it can help someone else get, their podcast out there, I'll share it and you guys can jump on it and see what you can learn. It might be the tool that you needed to help make your podcast better, Yes. So let's talk about something. A lot of podcasters, a lot of people in general, when it comes to the internet, they talk about SEO, right? Mm-hmm. Search engine optimization, right? And keywords and what you need to put in your title and your description and how you should, format this and that and whatever the case is. And as some background in tech that I did some studying into SEO and I realized a little bit, I don't know too much, but I realized a little bit how it worked with regards to website traffic.
Okay.
But in terms of podcasting, do you have any insight on SEO, or maybe you can give us some tips that we can share or that you can share with us as podcasters when we're creating our titles for our episodes or our descriptions, or even if we're just sharing our podcast? What tips can you give us with regards to SEO?
So yes, I also have limited information on SEO, but the cheat sheet for me, and I love that you have a cheat sheet that you send out to people. The cheat sheet for me has been AI. And basically, so there's Cast Magic that you can use, and Cast Magic is useful because it will give you a description, it will give you a title and everything that you need for your YouTube. But going back to SEO, SEO, again, is how you can drive traffic to your website. But also, if you're doing a podcast, there are pages like Pod Page, which I haven't yet tapped into myself, that allows you to create a website for your podcast, which is helpful, again, if you're trying to create both SEO, a blog, and have all of that in one central location. SEO, and the reason why I said using AI is because, for one, you probably can't come up with the catchy titles or the titles that will make everything come together cohesively. So Cast Magic can do that for you. It will take the transcript of the video and tell you exactly what it feels your title of your episode should be. And then you can use that same title and you can just repurpose it a little bit. You can make sure you're using that title in your vlog. Sorry, I get vlog and blog confused sometimes. Vlog is like video.
Yeah, right.
Blog is your blogging, the writing, the content.
Exactly.
You can use that to kind of be an extension of your blog using that same title. You can create a newsletter, and just how many different ways can you kind of integrate that same title, that same description, all of those keywords. So YouTube also allows you to add keywords, or tags is what they call it, to your video. So how can you kind of use that same content and repurpose it across all different mediums? Your newsletter, your blog, your video, and that will help drive, if everything is kind of cohesive, it will help drive traffic. And then if you use the platform like Pod Page and have all of that integrated, back to that key powerful word that you used earlier, that is how you help drive traffic in SEO. But one of another tools that I use that is very helpful, Answer the Public. And the reason why that's very helpful is because you can kind of gauge what people are interested in and thinking about. Go to that website. So your podcast is about golf. You can go to Answer the Public, type in golf. It will tell you like a whole wheel of what people are researching as it pertains to golf, and use that to kind of guide your topics and your conversations on your podcast. But then also using those kind of keywords and things that people are researching to kind of integrate and create SEO around it. So basically, what are some keywords and terms that you can use in the title? Because like what people are typing and looking for, you can put that into your title. And then how can you repurpose that several different ways so that it all drives and increases traffic, if that makes sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Okay.
That, I used to use Answer the Public. Maybe when I started blogging 9 years ago.
See, I didn't even know that it was around that long.
It's been around for a long time, but I stopped using it when I stopped blogging. I never had the thought to use it for my podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have it as a link saved on my homepage on my cell phone. But I never would think to use it for my podcast. So I'm going to use that for my podcast when I'm creating or searching for content ideas or what people are searching for related to specific things. So that's Answer the Public. And then you talked about Cast Magic. So maybe if we could, let's transition into some of the tools that you have in your toolkit.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So we could start off with what do you use in terms of like software, and then move towards like hardware. What are you using?
Yeah. So Zoom. And then a lot of people, when it comes to editing, and you can talk to me about editing because you're the expert. So a lot of people use things like Audacity or Descript, but I am actually in favor of CapCut. And I feel like it's cheap, about $8, but it has so many useful tools, both again, because I'm on YouTube. Let's not forget that. Let me preface that again. So the reasons why most people would use a Descript or Audacity is for audio.
Right.
I'm on YouTube. So I like the fact that you can cut the audio, but also that you can cut the video. And there's really cool tools like how to enhance your voice, how to isolate your voice, how to take out the background noise, reduce background noise. And I just can navigate on CapCut a lot easier. But my toolbox, I would say Canva, Zoom, CapCut, YouTube, Answer the Public, Cast Magic. There's also Video AI, which Video AI or Opus Clip are kind of do the same thing, which is to chop up your long form video into short form video so that when you do need to repurpose it for short form on YouTube Shorts or Reels, Instagram Reels, or Facebook Reels, that's when you would bring Video AI or Opus Clip into the fold to help you repurpose your content. And those are pretty much my go-to. My notepad on my phone. And then I'm also using Camo, which helps me so a lot of us talking about hardware, we have a laptop with a webcam, but it's very grainy for most of us, no matter if you have a high quality laptop or not. So Camo allows you to use your phone as the webcam. And so that's what I'm doing currently. I have my phone on a tripod next to me, and I'm able to use that to kind of give this polished look and not have to use my webcam because it would be very grainy. And so that's my recommendation for hardware. And then I have the Zoom mic that I'm using, which came with the Zoom mic and headphones.
And that's it.
And that's it.
Your setup is so simple, but you mentioned something so Camo, I've never heard of that before, because people will be surprised I hope people are not surprised, but you can get really good video with your cell phone.
That's right.
But I didn't even think that there was something to help transition or change your cell phone into a webcam. So this is new to me. I didn't know that because I just went out and bought a new webcam for this podcast, right? Hi, everybody. All right, so this is a new webcam that I'm using, but I didn't know that you could use your cell phone as a webcam and use that, for your podcast. So that is new to me. So I hope that helps anyone else out there who's thinking, oh, I know I want to start a podcast and I need to get a camera so that I can do clips and do video and stuff like that. Use your cell phone.
That's right.
And this app called Camo.
Camo. And I do have to say that I have an iPhone. I'm not sure that it's available for Android. You'll have to look into that. So, wah, wah, wah. But I have both an Android and an iPhone, and I know that it's available through iPhone.
Yeah. Now we're not gonna start a debate because every time we bring up Android and Apple, the people in the comments are going to get out there and be like, oh, Apple's better. No, that's why
I can say that because I have both. Literally, I have one that records me as I'm kind of talking and I use it for vlogging. And then I have one for the podcasting.
Mm-hmm. But you see, that is an interesting point. And I think people underestimate the power of their cell phone, right? How much things it can actually do.
Right.
So before you even go out there and spend a lot of money buying equipment for your podcast, so look into your cell phone to see what you can actually do with your cell phone. There was an interview that I did with someone. Her name is Dawn Wecker, and it blew my mind when she told me this. She has had her podcast. It's called Dawnversations, and she created a few hundred episodes so far. But she has been recording her entire podcast through her cell phone. And the audio, so I'm an audio guy, so I used to produce music. So my ears are really good when it comes to editing and listening to music. So I'm picking up on audio quality when I listen to podcasts. I listened to her podcast and I could not pick out the fact that she was using her cell phone microphone to record her podcast, which shows that she was using great technique where she was. It was a really quiet place and she did a great job at it. So your cell phone can actually do a lot to help your podcast get good sounding audios if you know how to use it properly.
That's right. I agree. Was she using Anchor or what did she ever tell you?
She was using GarageBand to record it.
GarageBand.
Yeah, built into her iPhone again, right? It's just amazing. The stuff that you can do with your cell phone, you just need to do a little research to find the apps out there that will work for you. But yeah, chances are you can start a podcast right now with just your cell phone, right?
That's right.
And you can have good sounding audio and, be able to do all the mixing, bring all of the music and everything into it all from your cell phone. You don't need to spend a lot of money to sync into a podcast, especially if you're just getting started.
Absolutely correct.
So we're just about to wrap up now. I want to ask you a final thing. Is there one piece of wisdom or one piece of insight? You've been great so far. Like I said, I learned so much from this, but is there one last thing that you want to leave with anybody, or is there anything I may have forgot to ask you?
You know what? This was a very much good interview. And I don't know that I did not give all that I had. I will say that another piece that people forget, two things. I'm a girl of campaigns. And so when I stepped on the scene, like I said, I was pregnant in my third trimester, and I used my pregnancy, yes, I did, to premiere both my pregnancy and my podcast. So I rented out a movie theater, which was not expensive. It was $100 and something to rent out a movie theater, but I had the whole banner called the premiere. I premiered the belly and I premiered the podcast, and I had people come and give their review of the podcast, and I recorded that. But I think the reason why I bring that up is because people ask, how can I grow my podcast? I think you should consider doing a lot of different campaigns around your podcast, kind of make things fun and interesting. Something that I thought about for you with I Made a Podcast is if you just did like 30 days going live on your social media, quirky things every day. I made a mocktail. I made a journal. I made an ebook. I made, and just kind of making yourself present on your social media page. But I think building campaigns around what you're doing to kind of bring people along the journey with you is extremely helpful and important. And you can do that maybe every time you premiere a new episode for the season premiere or your finale, but always finding ways to bring people along the journey with you. And also, personal branding is a part of your podcast. And so if you did something like, again, a campaign, but also behind the scenes content, educational content, like what you're doing here, I think that's also helpful for people who are building a podcast. We kind of make everything so isolated and bringing them all together. And I think that's a disservice because people want to see. So I go to a lot of people's pages who have a podcast, and you would not know that they have a podcast because they don't talk about the fact that they have a podcast. They feel like my podcast should only be on Apple or Spotify. Well, no, you need to show up on other parts of social media as well, like we talked about, and also create a personal brand around your podcast. So those are the two things. I guess it kind of all boils down to one, which is just personal branding, which can include campaigns, but just create fun and momentum and interesting things so that people are a part of the journey with you.
Wow, that is so awesome. Yeah, and so social media for me, it's a lot of work, and I'm trying to get better at promoting social media and doing all those things. But yeah, I've heard that campaigns work wonders, like 30-day campaigns, 1 week campaigns, or whatever the case is. But those type of campaigns, they work wonders for promotion of your podcast.
Absolutely.
Wow. Like, this was so awesome. You shared so much gold with us.
Thank you.
So I want to encourage everybody listening, please go and connect with Dani Marie. She's a podcast planning strategist. So you heard some of her wisdom that she shared today. Connect with her and see how she can take your podcast from one level that you're on right now to the next one, because you want to get to the next one, or else you wouldn't be doing it, right?
Right.
Right. No one wants to stay at 10 downloads per episode forever, right? Everybody wants to grow in what they're doing, and we want to get traction and get better. And some people are using their podcast as a business. So if you are using your podcast as a business, that's, your podcast is a lead generation tool for you. You need to have some sort of strategy in there. So I want to encourage you to talk to Dani Marie, connect with her. As you heard from this episode, there's a lot of things, a lot of wisdom that she has to share. And she can go into detail to help you get your podcast to the next level. So Dani Marie, I just want to thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Chris.
I learned so much. I have like a whole bunch of notes here beside me that I'm going to, take some time and study and see what I need to do differently to get my podcast to get a little better. But thank you so much for sharing all of your insight here on I Made a Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed myself.
Well, that's it for another great interview today. I hope that you learned something great about podcasting from my guest. And remember, I have links for all of their podcasts and all of their resources, all of their socials and everything. It's in the description if you want to follow them and get more of their content. If you learned something new from today's guest, and if you want more of I Made a Podcast, you can subscribe on all of the major podcasting apps on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Squadcast, Overcast, iHeartRadio. Just search I Made a Podcast and you'll be able to find this podcast and subscribe, and you'll get every future episode that I release on a Wednesday. And don't forget to sign up for my podcasting cheat sheet. The link is in the description. Or if you're a podcaster and if you want to work with me to produce your podcast, I have a link in the description for you to contact me as well. So remember, the best time to start a podcast was 10 years ago. The second best time is right now. So go ahead and make it happen. And I'll see you next week on I Made a Podcast. Peace.